Welcome, friends, to another edition of Global Capitalism, a presentation we offer every other month, usually on the second Wednesday, unless something interferes, as the flu did this last week, to postpone it. But we will normally be on the regular every other month Wednesday, second Wednesday of the month schedule. I want to begin before all announcements or anything else by sharing with you a historic moment in American history and, given its implications, probably in world history, that is unfolding literally as I speak. And the way I'm going to do this is to read to you from a press release dated on the 16th of January, 2026, and released by the Minneapolis, Minnesota Labor Federation, Regional Labor Federation, AFL-CIO. I'm going to read you now the lead of the press release. Minneapolis Labor Union delegation and local regional labor bodies endorse the January 23rd Day of Truth and Freedom. It is a call for a general strike in the Minneapolis area under the slogan and the banner, "No work, no school, no shopping." This is the reaction of the mayor, of the overwhelming majority of the citizens who have already been active and are now raising the level of their activity to that of a general strike to show what this community feels and wants for itself, and to protest against President Trump's use of the military to try to enforce on his own people, the citizens of Minneapolis, a major metropolis in the heart of the United States, a policy which the people reject. That's right. It's the people, with leadership provided not only by the labor movement, but crucially participating in that leadership is the labor movement, joining with others to protest everything represented by ICE, the scapegoating of immigrants, the deflection of resources from solving people's problems to dictating to Americans what they can and cannot say or do in public. This is a historic escalation of something we should begin now to call by its rightful name: class struggle. All right, let me turn then to the regular business for this session. These presentations have become commentaries. You've asked for that, and I'm trying to accommodate your request. Commentaries on the unfolding of another historic process, indeed a historic process in which that general strike planned for Minneapolis is an important moment. The general process is the decline of the American empire and the growing crisis of the American capitalism, which is what lay behind that empire, drove it, and is now suffering its decline. These presentations, again, are brought to you by Democracy at Work and in cooperation with the Left Forum. Both organizations work together to produce, to design, to present, and to distribute these videos. Please make use of them. Share them with your friends, your co-workers, your relatives, your community members. That's why we make them. That's why they are made available to you in this usable form. Be a partner. Use them. Okay. Last announcement before we jump into the horrible topic title that we chose, not to be sensational, but to tell you where we think things are going. We called this capitalism's Third World War. And I'll have something to say about that in a moment. I want to alert you, however, to the fact that we have been besieged in the last 6 months with an explosion of fake videos. Videos that use likenesses of my face or my voice or my way of presenting material, but are not made by us, are not authorized by us. They use artificial intelligence. They are becoming more and more creative. We have identified at least 12 languages in which this is being done, with millions of these videos circulating globally. Some of them are very sophisticated. You see the upper part of my face, but the lower part is not my mouth, and what's coming out is not my words or anything I've authorized. The only suggestion I have is make sure you see our logo, Democracy at Work. If you see somebody else's name, we only put out material under Democracy at Work. We have our YouTube channel, Democracy at Work. We have our Substack program, which I urge you to make use of, under Democracy at Work. If you pay close attention, you'll be able to see them. Indeed, many of you have, and I appreciate it because you've been emailing us and letting us know and sending us copies of what you suspected were fake videos. We report them all. We have lawyers working on this. We have procedures we're following, and we are in contact with Google about it all. But it is something we need help from you to have some kind of hope of bringing it under control. Many, many other people active in the internet, like me, with varying points of view, are suffering the same problem. We are not unique or special in any way. So you will get this message from me, but you'll be getting it from others whose programs you have come to want to see. All right. Capitalism's Third World War. Why do I say that? Well, because the 20th century, the one right behind us, was unhappily notable for two world wars in one century. One at the beginning and one in the middle. World Wars I and II. And they were remarkable because they were incredible clashes that involved almost all the people in the world, focused in on Europe, for sure, but including more and more of the rest of the world, because they were all about, among other basic issues, colonialism. They were fights over the division of the world. World War I, the division looked like this. The big, overwhelming empire that had overwhelmed all the others was the British Empire. In the 18th and 19th century, it had simply dominated the world. It either took countries over, all over the world, from whoever lived there before, or competed with other colonialisms, the French, the Spanish, the Portuguese, the Dutch, the German, and so on. But it was increasingly challenged, particularly in the second half of the 19th century, by three up-and-coming challengers. The United States, itself an ex-colony of Britain, Germany, a competing colonialism, and Japan, another competing colonialism. Other colonial countries or people or countries with colonial designs were mixed in, Russia, France, and so on. It was a clash of competing colonialisms. It blew up when finally the only way to prevail against the effort of another colony was to use military force, or try to. When the dust cleared, World War I proved to be the most devastating war probably in human history for the sheer destruction of life and property. But it was also the end of the British Empire. Oh, it took more years to literally go away, but Britain never recovered the position it had before World War I afterwards. There was a recognition by people that capitalism produced colonialisms that eventually clashed, because capitalism has this built-in core need to expand. Remember, every company is successful if it grows. Every executive builds his or her reputation if they're presiding over a growing market share. 100 ways of putting this. But it's a system that's based on endless growth. That's why we have the climate crisis we do. It has run roughshod over the literal capacity of the planet to support us, because we don't make decisions on what's reasonable or rational. We have to grow because it's the way the system is organized. Capitalism breeds colonialism. Even the colonialisms that existed before capitalism were intensified and globalized by capitalism. And people understood it after World War I, after the shock of all of that horrible killing. And so an effort was made, remarkable, to hold on to some bit of rationality. Something called the League of Nations was created after World War I. And the purpose was obvious and clear. Everything that could be done would be done to never have another global war like that. Everybody was supposed to participate. Initially, almost everybody did. But then one of the major colonial powers, Germany, who, because they lost World War I, had their colonies taken away from them, went through traumas around the loss of that war, around the reparations debt they had to pay in Germany after the war to the winners. The losers had to pay a lot of money. That meant their economy couldn't recover from the horror of the war. And remember, the war only ended in 1918. And 11 years later, in 1929, the world fell apart in the Great Depression that hit in that year. That means the German working class, in a very short time, lost the World War, had suffered the worst inflation based on their reparations that any modern country has suffered. And then the great crash of 1929. And the German working class went crazy. It was too much suffering, too much shock, too much loss in too short a time. And they looked for somebody to save them and thought they had found it in Adolf Hitler. And he took them out of the League of Nations. He wanted another shot at building an empire. The German word for empire, Reich, the Third Reich, the third effort of the Germans to have the global empire that they always wanted to replace the British Empire. If World War I ended the dominance of the British Empire, World War II did the same thing for two of the three challengers of the British. It wiped out the German effort, and it wiped out the Japanese effort. But it didn't do that to the American effort. And so after World War II, we get the American empire. And that is what's crumbling now. And that crumbling, especially as it is watched by the part of the world most damaged by the West, China, Russia, the BRICS, the Global South, beginning to mobilize as they too understand what we've titled this presentation, that there is something going on that looks and smells like the buildup to a third capitalist world war. And so I want to make that case to you, for you, today, as a commentary on what's happening, as a way to see what brings together the different phenomena that dominate our headlines, and also, of course, to mobilize as many people as possible to take the steps in their thinking, in their action, in their politics, so that the direction we're talking about never realizes the end point it might otherwise achieve. Okay. A declining empire, a declining American empire, has provoked profound shifts and changes in American life. They are not listed or understood generally as symptoms of empire decline because that very idea is a taboo still in the United States. Yes, there are more and more people who are beginning to see it. That's true. But they are still a small minority, and the dominant discourse of the political leaders, of the media leaders, of the intellectual leaders is to pretend that no such economic decline of our empire is underway. Yes, we lost the war in Vietnam. Yes, we lost the war in Afghanistan. Yes, we're losing the war in Ukraine. It's pretty clear. Losing wars is mainly how we interact with them in recent history. You might want to think about what that means, but we don't. The United States is now the core of a collection of allies, and I use the word allies loosely since we're in the process of destroying most of those alliances, but the allies we used to call the G7, the United States, Britain, France, Germany, Italy, Canada, and Japan, are less and less coordinated, less and less in agreement, more and more in conflict. And even if they weren't, if you add up all their wealth, it's less than that of China, Russia, and the BRICS. A whole new focus, a whole new core, a whole new center of the world economy has risen up and become larger than that anchored in and by the United States. And that has led to desperate action, especially desperate because it can't access the reality that it's part of. It has to come up with other explanations, which it does. Here's a popular one. You blame immigrants. Makes no sense at all, doesn't explain the empire's decline. If anything, the opposite. But no, you can demonize the other. Hitler demonized his others. Mr. Trump also does. Nor is he alone. Plenty of other politicians in declining capitalisms, particularly in Europe, enjoy scapegoating immigrants as if destroying them or exporting them or imprisoning them is going to solve your economic problems. As I have said over and over again, the United States is a wealthy country of 330 million people. It has 10 to 12 undocumented immigrants. Those are among the poorest people in the country. In no way do they cause its basic economic problems. But If you're desperate, you do desperate things. In the beginning of his second term, Mr. Trump decided to impose tariffs on the whole world. No one's ever seen anything like this. Country after country badgering them, high taxes, low taxes, tariffs, which are a kind of tax, a tax on imports. He threatened virtually every country on earth. He bargained. I'll lower the tariff. I could have put it at 100%. He did that sometimes. Or as little as 10 or 15. And the question of what you get depends on how much money you're going to invest in the United States. How much you're going to reorganize your economy to benefit the United States at the expense of your own people. Quite a thing to ask a leading politician in another country. Ursula von der Leyen, representing the Europeans, agreed to invest over $1 trillion of European money raised out of the European economy, which would not go back into the European economy, but would be invested in the United States if they wanted lower tariffs than what they might otherwise get. In the last few days, to show that he's prepared to do anything necessary, Mr. Trump has again threatened to re-raise the tariffs on Europe unless they go along with handing over Greenland to the United States. Letting everybody in the world know, whatever the tariff is now, I may raise it next week, next month, next year, for whatever it is I decide I want. And you will be forced to give it to me or suffer the consequences. This is the American empire using the fact that it's still an important market for much of the world as a club with which to do what exactly? Let's take a look. The money that will be raised, we were told, by the tariffs will go a long way towards reducing the budget deficits our government has gotten used to, huge multi-trillion-dollar deficits. But a moment's attention shows that that's not the case at all. The 100 or 200 billion that the tariffs will raise each year, if that, if trade stays the way it is, which it probably won't. But even if it did, that's not going to pay for what? For anything. Mr. Trump has announced, as part of his desperate effort to keep this empire from sliding further, quicker, that he's going to raise the defense budget, which already is higher in the United States than in the next 6 or 7 countries combined, which include Russia and China. He wants to raise it, you ready? 50% this coming year, from roughly $900 billion to roughly $1.5 trillion. A staggering explosion. That'll eat up all of the money the tariffs bring in, plus leave a lot more to be covered. So it's not for that. Well, what is it? What is it he wants? He wants to offset the decline of the existing American empire by snatching more of the world's surface. He wants to return the world to the kinds of competitive colonial grabbing that we had before World War I, that brought Britain up against France, both of them up against Russia, and on and on and on. That's what it's about, the Venezuela prank. Snatching the president, leaving the rest of the country in an open-ended dilemma of what to do and how to do it. Snatching Greenland. If you look at the story of Greenland, it very quickly becomes clear, although the media carefully avoid talking about it, that this really isn't Mr. Trump's idea. This is the idea of the billionaires around him. Mr. Bezos, Mr. Zuckerberg, Peter Thiel, who have invested already large amounts of money. They have plans, you see, for Greenland. It may have rare earths that are needed for their projects. It may have electricity generation capabilities they need for their AI projects, and so on. And they've been talking to Mr. Trump for years about Greenland. And what a wonderful deal for them. The United States goes on a campaign. That's what Mr. Trump has done. He's going to spend huge amounts of money to either buy Greenland or to mount some sort of political campaign or even a military campaign. Spend a fortune of money. He's going to have to transform Greenland. They don't allow private property in land. Depending on which political party is in office there, they either do or do not allow the kind of development that Zuckerberg and Bezos want. They don't want their country ripped up for rare earths. That's not their priority. But their priority doesn't count under colonialism. That's when a big, powerful country goes into a less powerful country and takes what it wants when it wants it, not paying attention to what the local people want. The people of Greenland have made it abundantly clear they don't want the United States to run their country. They don't even want the Danes to do so, and they've been part of Denmark for centuries. But who knows? The divisions in their society, divisions like exist in almost all societies, may lead one or another of the groups in Greenland to cut a deal with the United States, get something good for themselves, sacrifice their fellow Greenlanders. Can that happen? Sure. Has it happened? Sure. Might it happen here? Yeah. Might it not? Equally the case. It depends, like everything else I'm talking about, on whether we, the people, do something. The people of Minneapolis might have gone back into their homes, intimidated by ICE, and therefore no longer protest whatever it is ICE does. But they didn't do that. And now they're going to go on a general strike. People are beginning to recognize what is underway and the urgency, therefore, to stop it, to say no. After World War II, reeling from these two world wars provoked by capitalism, undertaken by capitalist societies, busily destroying one another, the world tried again. They didn't call it the League of Nations. Look where that had led, or rather where it didn't. So we called it the United Nations, and we tried again. One of the things that killed the League of Nations was the withdrawal of the important country of Germany. And what is killing the United Nations is the withdrawal of the United States. Mr. Trump, in recent weeks, proudly withdrew the United States from 66 international organizations, among which were quite a few United Nations agencies. That continued an approach to the United Nations that he has had from the beginning, an approach best captured by the English word disdain. Well, what does that leave you? Not working out a problem, not working out a disagreement, taking things by force, where and when you want them. And what covers it all? National security. Well, for the last 6 or 7 years, the billionaires around Mr. Trump have been busily investing in Greenland. National security was not what they were after. Profits is what they were after, as their behavior clearly shows, and as they don't deny. We're seeing a rebirth of colonialism. That's right. That's what Mr. Trump's behavior in Venezuela and now Greenland promises. And notice, he bombed Nigeria, he bombed Iran, he has threatened Panama, he has threatened Canada, he has threatened Mexico. Where does this stop? World War I and II was where it stopped last time. That's why the title of this talk was The Third World War that is being prepared for. And in order to get the United States lined up for this project, we have a number of new situations that make it very difficult. In the 18th century, the 19th century, even into the 20th century, it was possible for a rich, powerful European country, because that's what mostly it was, to take over an Asian, an African, a Latin American country, officially, formally, or informally. That's not the way it is now. In the 21st century, you can't do that. We are living through a historic epoch that is known for its anti-colonialist mentality. Most of the people in the world live in countries that in recent memory fought their way out of a colonial status to achieve independence. That's right. Most of Africa, most of Asia, and if you're honest about the informal colonialism of the United States, Latin America too. That's where the majority are. They don't favor colonialism now. If you want to get a clear sense, because they can't risk saying it out loud about the United States, although they're doing that now. They have been able to say so for the last 30 years about Israel. Why? Because Israel is a settler colonialism. It's an attempt by mostly European people to settle in a part of the world that isn't Europe and to expand by pushing out or killing the local people. Yeah, that was done. That's the history of the United States, isn't it? That's the history of Australia, of New Zealand, and of many other places. But you can't do that now. If you do, you are the isolated, rogue nation. Israel loses the votes in the UN by overwhelming majorities. It's totally isolated in its Gaza program. In fact, the only country significantly that supports them is the United States. Why? Because the United States senses that it is going to be doing what the Israelis have already mapped out. Only maybe they'll do it in Mexico, or Canada, or Greenland, or Panama, or Venezuela. We don't know yet. Those things are never so clear at the beginning. To carry out a policy like that, you would have to do something extraordinary, because anti-colonialism is deeply in the American mentality too. And so you need to push a rhetoric of anti-immigration, evil foreigners, dangerous foreigners seeking to invade. You have to imaginarily create what? a mentality that will allow you to use the people's tax money to build the empire, because that's how it was always done. It was the mass of people who paid the cost. They didn't get the profits from it. Mr. Thiel, Mr. Bezos, Mr. Zuckerberg, sure they want the American government under Trump to go and take Greenland. It'll cost billions if you buy it, billions if you attack it militarily or diplomatically. All that taxpayer money in order to get it so that the companies, and they're already in existence, Cobalt and a whole bunch of others that are already busy for years exploring in Greenland, hoping to find rare earths, oil, gas, things like that. Some of them have been found. How do you mobilize a people to pay for what is a dangerous path to the third capitalist world war? You come up with reasons that they might believe in. And so we have what? We have something which is emerging in the United States as a kind of civil war. Oh, it's called culture war. It's called a variety of things. It's the Republican Party under Mr. Trump mobilizing its mass voter support, something the Republicans have been working on for decades, mobilizing evangelical Christians, mobilizing white supremacists, mobilizing foes of abortion. You know the groups. They're not a surprise. They're well understood. Mobilize them so that they become militant. They have to learn to see other Americans not as those who disagree with them, but as those who represent an existential threat, so that you can justify what? ICE. You have to justify ICE, a special new military force. The United States has one of the biggest military forces in the world, boasts about it all the time. Huge army, huge air force, huge National Guard, huge police forces around the country. It doesn't need more armed police / military types, but it did. It created its own. Mr. Trump's own what? Army. Let me tell you a story you should know, but in case you don't. Early in the life of the Nazi Party in Germany, they would discover that people sometimes disrupted their meetings. So they set up a little police force, a protection force, they called it. German initials SS. Special police force of, by, and for the Nazi Party. In power, and even earlier, but once in power, they made it a governmental program of the Nazi Party. In German, it was called the Geheimstaatspolizei. If you take the first letters, Gestapo. All those movies you saw, what those people did to others, their terrorization of gay people, Jewish people, communists, socialists, unionists, homosexuals, gypsies, all the people oppressed, terrorized, and eventually slaughtered by the SS and the Gestapo. It doesn't matter what the intent of ICE was. It doesn't matter what the intent of Mr. Trump might be, if we could ever figure it out. It's where this stuff leads over and over again historically that has to be our guide, has to be able to suggest to us what frightening possibilities lurk in what ICE is becoming, in the amount of money Mr. Trump is shoveling over to ICE. When the ICE person killed Renee Good, right away the leaders explained she was the troublemaker. She was the evil person. She was the cause of being shot by somebody supposedly trained in police work. Are we supposed to be blind? The people of Minneapolis aren't. That's why the general strike has been called there. And that's why the general strike is becoming an idea whose conditions have arrived. That's why it's occurring to people. Sean Fain, the head of the United Auto Workers, talks about a general strike on the 1st of May in the year 2028. He's looking 2.5 years into the future when contracts expire for his unions, and he hopes other unions too. But it's the thought, it's the idea that's in his mind, and therefore in the mind of millions of others, as it has proven to be an exciting idea in and for the people of Minneapolis. When I opened today's presentation by reading to you from the press release issued by the Minneapolis Federation of Workers, AFL-CIO, I didn't tell you what I'm going to tell you now. They represent 80,000 workers, unionized workers in the greater Minneapolis area. We're talking about mass mobilizations for general strikes. And whatever happens to this one, it marks a historic elevation, or if you like, escalation of the contradiction and the confrontation between this president and his agenda on the one hand, and the mass of people on the other. Now, finally, I want to turn to the domestic fallout from the declining empire and from the desperate acts of this government that are leading us toward a third capitalist world war. Mr. Trump thrives on being different, on not being the conventional Republican Party leadership, nor, for that matter, the conventional Democratic Party leadership. To his credit, he grasps somewhere that the game that everybody has been playing for the last 75 years is no longer playable. That part he gets. He has no explanation around the declining empire. After all, that's a taboo, and he is very respectful of that taboo. No. Beyond suggesting that previous presidents have been inadequate and that he is what we need, which is part of his personality and has been all his adult life. Beyond that, though, there isn't much in the way of reflection on the historical conditions. He's just going to disregard what went before, mock it, caricature it, and then proceed to bluster and try to force his way into a different set of conditions. And the rest of the world doesn't want to do it. Some won't say it yet. Some can't. Some, like our European ex-allies, got so used to playing second fiddle to whoever was in the White House for the last 75 years that they literally cannot break the habit. It's their careers, it's their lifetime, it's everything they believed. They are unprepared for how to think about, let alone deal with, the naughtiness of Mr. Trump. You can see it in their reaction to the tariffs. You can see it into their reaction to his withdrawal from participating in the Ukraine war the way the U.S. once did. You can see it in their disbelief of what he's doing in Greenland now, and so on. Those alliances that were famous for the United States are of no interest to Mr. Trump. In fact, he thinks of the alliances as having held back the United States. There's one of the consequences of not being able to think about what a declining empire might mean. What are its roots? What are its mechanisms? No. He can't go there. That's a taboo. Kamala Harris couldn't go there either. So you have to come up with another story. And Mr. Trump's story, provided by the sycophants around him, is that the United States has been victimized by everybody on earth, by poor immigrants coming in and stealing things, by foreign countries having inappropriate balances of trade with the United States, by cheating us, I quote from the president, an image of the president as victim, which gives him an interesting political tool, because being or playing the victim appeals to the actual victims of economic development over the last 50 years in this country, which has been the end of the white, male, unionized factory labor force, as manufacturing left the United States and went to China, India, Brazil, and 100 other places. It went there because of decisions made by whom? By the employer class in this country, not by the workers. They didn't vote for the company to move to China. They were opposed to it. But it's very clever for Mr. Trump to blame the Chinese for decisions made by American corporations, because criticizing American corporations is another taboo you do not do. And if you dare come up with an idea that they don't like, they let you know right away. Over the last 2 weeks, Mr. Trump, beginning to be told by his advisors the economic dead end he's facing, tariffs won't work, have not generated and will not the money, may even be declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court in part or in toto, but in any case can't solve the problem. And you're spending more, which means you're going to have to borrow more at a time when the world wants to lend you less. What is he going to do? Where is he? So he comes up, because he doesn't understand the rules real well, with ideas that take some money from the ruling class. He wants the government mortgage banks, Fannie Mae, and so on, to buy more mortgages, to drive down the interest rate so people can buy homes. He's going to deal with the affordability crisis in part in that way. He's going to limit the interest rate on credit card balances. 10%, he says, instead of the average now, which is 22%. That's going to hurt. Jamie Dimon, the head of Chase, J.P. Morgan Chase, said that that's a bad idea. He smacked Mr. Jamie Dimon, called him wrong-headed, and so on. He's proposed half a dozen things that impinge on private enterprise in ways that they don't want and they don't like, and they're telling him. And why is that important? Because the Republican Party is a coalition of big business funders and the mass of people their funds can pull in to vote for the Republicans. They won't win if they don't get that money. That's why the Democrats are very mealy-mouthed in their opposition, because they go to the same donors for their money. It's a problem, the fact that our two major parties are beholden to the same class of donors. If we weren't living in a taboo that you can't say these things, you can't deal with them, you can't face them, then what I'd be telling you, I wouldn't have to tell you because you'd already know that. And many of you do. But we're getting to the point where we're going to have to do something. Mr. Trump's GOP coalition may destroy itself. His attacks recently on corporate leaders are a sign he is even more desperate than he had been before. They didn't mind him doing desperate things domestically. They're not opposed to ICE. But if he says something about capping interest rates, they're right on it. That's who they are. That's who they've always been. But the comfortable management of a global empire, which the United States was in a position to do from 1945 to 2010, 2015, is over. We can't. And so we are resorting to desperate efforts to rewrite history, to get money in new ways, to extort out of the whole world tribute, or else we hit them with a tariff. And then we're surprised to learn that over the last year, when China could sell much less to the United States because of the tariffs, the Chinese didn't mind. Everything they couldn't sell to the United States, they sold to their BRICS allies. Plus, Chinese exports had their greatest success in 2025, the year of Mr. Trump's hostility. They did better than before, just like their economy grew 3 times faster than the United States last year as well. The basic contours of the decline of the American empire have not changed. The desperation of the leadership, that is getting worse. The division of the country into bitter hostilities that undercut the attractiveness of the United States as a place to do business. Mr. Trump doesn't understand why the tariffs and everything else haven't brought the flood of business to the United States. Well, I'll tell you, Mr. Trump, you'd have to be out of your mind to be a foreign business person. Yeah, the tariffs hurt, but you're going to go locate your factory in a place where the government's troops are battling general strikes of the people. You're not doing that. Civic distress is a major reason not to go to a country. It always has been. One of your policies is undermining the other. You know why? Because you're not a good politician? No. Because you're caught in a decline. And when you're in a decline, even the things you do well somehow come back and hurt because they're offset by the other problems of a declining empire. So where does this all come together? It comes together in a growing isolation of the United States. What do I mean? Well, we saw it earlier with the only major country that supports Israel in Gaza and what it's doing there. That's a sign. Now we're becoming a colonial power at a time in world history where everybody is against colonialism. That's an isolating phenomenon. In the course of that, we are chucking aside our traditional alliances, turning the leaders of Mexico, Canada, and many other countries to looking eagerly for deals with our enemies, China, Russia, and so on, the BRICS, our economic enemies who may become other kinds of enemies also. But self-isolation is in its obtuse way a kind of preparation for war. The demonizing of others, particularly the demonizing of foreigners, that's a step in that direction. I didn't mean to be alarmist by calling this capitalism's third world war. My whole point and purpose is to avoid it, to prevent it, to get us off on a different track. But it is crystal clear to me, as it is to a growing number of Americans, that perhaps the most potent foundation for staying on that road is the commitment to capitalism, the commitment to an economic system that rewards leaders, not for the quality of the society they produce, but for the profits their enterprises generate, who therefore are incentivized to do almost anything to enhance that profit, legal or not so legal, honorable or not so honorable, decent or not so decent, depending on the opportunity and depending on the background. Or, as Mr. Trump said to the New York Times interview a couple of weeks ago, the only thing that holds me back is my own morality. Really? That's what you learned out of 2 world wars? Out of all those efforts for the League of Nations, United Nations, to come up with rules that would prevent us from using force on one another? And lest people think that that's not a real problem, let me remind you of some things you should never forget. China and Russia are now closely allied. Together, they have a much greater population than we do. Together, they have more nuclear weapons than we do, and more capacity to deliver them than we do. Do we really need to learn the lesson Britain learned and from which they never recovered? The loss of their empire? Starting with World War I? Or what happened to Germany and Japan after the loss of World War II? Really? We have to do that also to learn the same lesson? It's worth posturing as thinking people, which in our best moments we are, to face what is evolving and emerging, to see the historical parallel, not as a prediction of the future, nobody can do that, but as a recognition of where the future might lie, and use that then as a guide to what to do to prevent it. We live in an extraordinarily intense period of time. The world economy is changing. The role of the United States is diminishing. The roles of China and Russia and India and Brazil are rising. That's not going to stop. It hasn't stopped for the last 75 years, and it isn't about to stop now. The United States had more capacity to stop it 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago than it does now, and it couldn't do it at any of those times. And it can't do it now either. And that's true whether you enhance the military budget by $500 billion in a year or not. And to our allies, or should I say ex-allies, the British, the French, the Germans, the Mexicans, the Canadians, and so many others, you are being treated to a picture of a desperate ally who is ready to sacrifice you. And the question for you really is, are you going to go down with the leader of that part of the global economy that you hitched your wagon to? You're not going to have much more time to make that decision. Thank you all for your attention, and I look forward in a couple of months, second Wednesday of March, to talk with you again. Welcome, friends, to another Global Capitalism presentation. This one for March 20.